And of course, in hindsight, I think that goes down as like a pivot point for the activity, possibly. So, and then I had the complete honor of then getting to perform that in the Blast show. And I will say that's probably, that's not the same as being on that 1993 field with that full drum corps, but it's its own thing that has its,
a little taste of it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And boy, what wasn't Starr making a career out of showing drum corps in the marching world what could be done on the field, and the marching world was having none of it.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello, and welcome to episode 49 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of February 17th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a pair of stories about friends of the podcast, a tiny bit of pushback against an online writer, the first BandWagon reference to the Library of Congress, and my trio section conversation answers the burning question, how do you start a drum corps? I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Right from the beginning of this podcast thing, my listenership contributed good ideas for segment and interview subjects. Of course, at the very beginning, the Venn diagram of my listenership and my friend list was probably a circle, but it counted, and it still does. My guest for this week's trio section is someone I would very probably not have crossed paths with, but for the connection made by a member of that circular Venn diagram. Thank you, Ryan. And there is one upcoming trio section interview subject with whom I will have held a conversation thanks to a connection facilitated by a previous trio section guest whose own appearance in a past trio section was facilitated by a yet more previous trio section guest who himself is a friend of mine. And I kind of feel like that will be this podcast's inception moment. So, double check your band bus lists and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Beltsville, Maryland. Scott Engel, Christina Donnell-Leibovitz, and Carol Cox Forbes will present a clinic at the Maryland Music Educators Association State Conference on Friday, March 7th, entitled Drum Major Crash Course. The clinic is intended to be a resource for marching band directors and staff members in the selection, training, and empowerment of future drum majors. The trio are collectively the designers and leaders of the Towson University Summer Marching Arts Drum Major Camp, and Carol Cox Forbes was, of course, a trio section guest in episode 41 of the BandWagon podcast back in early December. Dateline, Boston, Massachusetts. Michael Nicholson, mayor of the city of Gardner, has been unanimously elected as the president of the Massachusetts Mayors Association. Nicholson, who has served as Gardner's mayor since 2020, has been instrumental in bringing significant developments to Gardner, including the Gardner Elementary School project that came in $8 million under budget, the creation of 2 vacant storefront revitalization districts, an increase of double the amount of grant awards over the last 2 years, and increased private investment across the city. Nicholson's dedication to improving the city of Gardner and creating lasting partnerships that will lead to increased investments in the future have earned him respect among his peers and widespread recognition across the state. As president of the Massachusetts Mayors Association, Nicholson will lead advocacy efforts around housing, economic development, and other issues facing municipalities across the Commonwealth. In this role, he will work with state leaders, industry experts, and his colleagues to advocate for the needs of municipalities and to promote efficient, effective, and thriving local government. Not insignificantly, Mike Nicholson was a trio section guest on the 6th episode of the BandWagon podcast. It's not Mike's grandest achievement by far, but he was an important part of the initial stages of this little band podcast. He was very generous with his very limited time, and I'm only admitting this to the world now, he was gracious enough to cheerfully re-record the first 3 or 4 minutes of our interview when I failed to hit the little red record button. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick break. Meet you on the other side. Hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, I have a brief thought, and perhaps you'll think this is a rerun, but it's not. It's just another example of bands being treated like the late Rodney Dangerfield used to profess to feeling. Yeah, I can't get no respect. It's not entirely true. I mean, at last week's Super Bowl festivities in New Orleans, Louisiana, there were quite a number of high school and college bands involved, just not at halftime. Well, they used to involve them at halftime, but lately, no, they don't. We know this. Now, I have included in this week's show notes a link to a YouTube video that is 37 minutes of the band performances from the Super Bowl 59 Host Committee Parade held in New Orleans on Saturday the 8th of February. Those performing bands, all from the New Orleans area, included the United States Marine Band, the St. Augustine High School Band, the Louisiana State University Tiger Marching Band, the Edna Carr High School Band, the Roots of Music Marching Crusaders, the Archbishop Rummel High School Band, the L.B. Landry High School Band, the Warren Easton Charter High School Band, the Brother Martin High School Band, the Tulane University Marching Band, the George Washington Carver High School Band, the John F. Kennedy High School Band, the McDonough Senior High School Band, they're called the McDonough 35, and they're bigger than 35, the Covington High School Band, the South Plaquemine High School Band, and the Archbishop Shaw High School Band. It's not the kind of event that you would expect Fox Sports to include in their coverage of the Super Bowl festivities. Much more important to spend half an hour on Cover 3 defenses. But head on over to YouTube and please do enjoy more than half an hour of fun parade bands. In his online article about the Super Bowl 59 pregame show, Doug Doyle, news director of the jazz-oriented public radio station WBGO in Newark, New Jersey, noted that New Orleans native and icon Harry Connick Jr. performed with Southern University's marching band. They're nicknamed the Human Jukebox. My social media feed kind of lit up when they hit the TV screens. Hey, college band, national TV, super big worldwide audience, cool. Just out of curiosity, the next morning, I went searching online for articles that might maybe have described the Southern University performance in a little more florid detail. With respect to Mr. Doyle's journalism training, his article was relatively terse. Just the facts, ma'am. And not too far into my search, because Google's search algorithms always put the big corporate entities first in its listings of search results, I quickly spotted an article on CBS.com entitled Full List of Every Super Bowl Halftime Performer in History, Kendrick Lamar, Usher, Rihanna, Beyonce, and more. Hey, there's a rabbit hole. I'll go down it. The article began, and I can't claim to love all the writing style here, but I am only reciting it. One of the major non-football storylines that centers around the Super Bowl is the halftime show. These days, the halftime show is one of the most exciting performances of the year and is headlined by some of the biggest artists of all time. And the writer went on to talk about last week's Super Bowl halftime lineup. And then she continued, for the artists who play the halftime show at the Super Bowl, they're entertaining an audience that is exponentially bigger than any they've ever encountered. It was not always like that, however. So, what were the shows like before they were must-see television? Do you remember that killer halftime show featuring the Rockettes, Chubby Checker, and the 88 Grand Pianos in 1988? Do you remember the captivating Bebop Bamboozled at the Orange Bowl in 1989? No, you do not. Ditto Carol Channing, twice, or any one of those four annoyingly contrived Up With People performances in the late 70s and early 80s. Okay, I don't want to come off as thin-skinned here. I know, too late. But can we not dump on the Rockettes, or Chubby Checker, who had a certain amount of talent, or Carol Channing, who at the time of her appearance was a perfectly famous person? And by the way, the second time she was part of the halftime show, the show was called Salute to Louis Armstrong, and it also featured Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, that to me qualifies as a pretty damn highbrow Super Bowl halftime show, with, forgive me, legendary people. Up with people? Well, not everything's 100%. Anyway, the writer continued in a continuing snarky tone that I'm not sure I was expecting to read on CBS.com. The Super Bowl halftime show before Michael Jackson was an endless wasteland of college marching bands and maddening flag-spinning tributes, from Salutes to Hollywood, twice, to Motown, to the big band era, to the Caribbean, to Duke Ellington. We also got the New Kids on the Block in 1991, not singing any of their biggest hits, and Gloria Estefan in 1992 providing the soundtrack for Olympic figure skaters Dorothy Hamill and Brian Boitano, because nothing says a Minnesota Super Bowl like the lead singer of the Miami Sound Machine. Okay, I'm going to cut in here and suggest that just because a probably early 20-something CBS staff writer doesn't know who Duke Ellington is, But of course, you will be unsurprised to learn what really got my attention was, again, this little bit of attempted hip and cool attitude. The Super Bowl halftime show before Michael Jackson was an endless wasteland of college marching bands and maddening flag-spinning tributes. I'm only going to say this once, this week. I understand that to some people, marching bands and flag spinning is not super interesting. Not every writer is required to fawn over the band activity, or any activity. But that article was pitched as what has been called a listicle, a written piece that was just a laundry list of items that fit into a particular category. Not an op-ed piece. Yes, this is my journalism training talking here as well. Not every online article needs to be as terse and factual as Doug Doyle's pregame article. And not every online article needs to be as snarky and ain't I too cool for the room as the CBS writer's piece was. Am I a little bit predisposed to jumping at shadows where press and culture writers' treatment of the band world is concerned? Yes, I confess, it is an occupational hazard. My listenership will probably come down more on the hey, lay off the bands side of this than on the let's make fun of the bands side. That will come as no surprise. I'm preaching to the choir, or to the band, but it does speak to where a lot of people's attitudes toward American culture currently are, and it doesn't leave me currently optimistic about that in general. I'm not talking about do I like rap. This has nothing to do with Kendrick Lamar. Some of it, yes, I enjoy, and other rap, not so much. I'm vast, I contain multitudes. But what the modern mainstream media has trained Americans to consider great entertainment, for about the last 75 years, not just the last few, is, let's be frank, much more often the American Idol sorts of performances than large ensemble things. Forgive me, but the winners of American Idol are not judged strictly on their musical prowess, but they're also judged using a whole lot of metrics that have to do with style and look and attractiveness of various kinds, and not so much on literally how musically competent and trained a musician they are. Friends, if you are a contributing member of, say, a community band, you have to be able to play an instrument. And that, by itself, is an achievement that takes a lot more work than your average kid in the basement learning to sing just like what they hear on the radio, which is sometimes great and is sometimes not, right down to the, if they keep singing like that, their voice will be destroyed in 5 years details. I'm not going to dwell too much longer on this, and I'm trying to resist sounding like the old fart who reminisces about back in my day and insists that new innovations in musical entertainment just simply cannot beat the barbershop quartets that used to congregate on street corners in the 1890s. But there was a time when popular music was an 18-piece big band. In fact, there was a time when concert bands had their own nationally broadcast radio programs. We'll talk about that soon here, I'm sure. And yeah, music evolves, as do musical tastes and understandings, but I am flashing back to the day when the principal of the school I taught at was regaling me with stories of a music class that was taught at the school he previously worked in, a general music class that taught all about the technical and artistic sides of music using only top 40 hits. And he was really giving me the hard sell about how I should set up a music elective too for our school for next year, modeled on this same idea. And I remember smiling and nodding and thinking to myself, I will never use only one sort of music to teach, because the United States of America has produced more than just a guy with an electric guitar croaking out something that sounds like it might be a melody if you give it half a chance. I will never teach my music students that the most important kind of music is the stuff that looks, forgive me, like Bruce Springsteen or U2. They're fine. But we Americans also produced Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue and Fillmore's Rolling Thunder, and singers singing lead in front of the Basie Band, who were technically better singers than anybody currently gracing the airwaves, and also the Staples Singers and the Stan Kenton Orchestra airwaves, I know, and the Boston Pops and the Coast Guard Band. All those outfits were more than just a one-man show, and frequently took, and take, longer than checking out a YouTube video for how to do it. Yeah, my rant is over for the moment, but I guess it just means we gotta not stop with this band thing. As often as possible, keep bands as front and center as we possibly can, and point out how much work it is just to be in one. Never mind put it together and make it work. That's what this little tiny podcast wants to contribute to, after all. Endless wasteland, my foot. All right, let's observe a little fermata here, and on the other side of the break, I have a conversation for you that you will enjoy. Hope you'll stick around. Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a gentleman who described himself to me early in our acquaintance as someone with a non-traditional music education path, which struck me as familiar and also, I would judge, fits right in with my hopes for the interview segment of this podcast. In fact, the whole thrust of it. Band folks don't all come to band from the same background. They don't all have the same priorities, famously. They don't all become band directors, but some do. And if I'm not mistaken, I think my guest and I may have a thing or two in common as it relates to the path to becoming a band director. I'll see if I'm right about that. As I ask you, dear listener, to please help me welcome to the program, Tim Heasley. Tim.
Hey, Rob. Glad to be here.
Even a brief reading of your LinkedIn page, for example, will suggest that your background and your skill set might be seen as the pivot point, or at least as being part of the pivot point in Drum and Bugle Corps' development from a performance output perspective. And I can certainly imagine we'll dig into that a bit. Now, I usually start these trio section conversations with a few quick fire round questions by way of introduction, and I will. But first, I'm going to say something even more right up front, which, well, I think there may be an outside chance that the only way it gets mentioned is if I do the mentioning. So my listenership may be interested to know that in 2020, Tim Heasley was named Drum Corps International's Open Class Director of the Year. So everybody pay attention. So with that out of the way, here are my usual intro questions. And the first one is always, what's your primary instrument?
That's a great question. And it's honestly a little hard to answer, but the first instrument that I really officially started on would have been piano. I was very fortunate to have parents that made sure that I had an opportunity to take piano lessons early on. But just as soon as I could kind of stop practicing piano, I picked up the trombone in my elementary school band and was on trombone for kind of from there on out, but was able to kind of explore, as many of us do, into different instruments. I was really a marching band kid at heart, drum corps kid at heart. And so that meant at that time, learning a valved instrument. So I learned how to play marching baritone in my high school marching band. All the while, what I really wanted to do was to play drums. And so luckily, I was able to participate in my high school's winter percussion section. And that really led to just tapping into just my passion for percussion. So even though that's not technically where my training was, that is still to this day the instrument. If I have 5 minutes to pop away from work and spend some time, I'll go to my drum set and play and get back to my day. So that's kind of in a nutshell, my instrumental background.
There was a time when trombones were not involved in drum corps, and now they kind of are. I suppose maybe you could have done that at some point, but you couldn't at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool to have seen that evolution through time. I mean, that probably would have changed, a lot of things for individuals at that time who maybe would have gotten involved if they knew that was an option for them. For me, it was like, whatever I got to do to be on the field. So
Yeah.
in fact, it wasn't even, when I started, it wasn't even B-flat instruments. I had to learn how to play a G bugle. And so a 2-valve G bugle at that. So, which older folks might actually laugh at because they had far different, even more archaic, I guess, versions of those bugles than I did. But I do remember getting a 3rd valve at some point in my marching career, which is exciting. But yeah, it's definitely an evolution for sure.
So at this point, there are a couple of questions that I usually ask, and my mind is just exploding, imagining the answers. But the two questions are, how'd you get into playing whatever primary instrument that is? And you've got 3. And what bands or other groups have you been active with in your life?
So definitely for trombone, it was school band. So my elementary, junior high, high school band. But I definitely would attribute learning baritone to my experience in drum corps because it kind of forced the issue. If I wanted to be in a drum corps, I needed to learn a valved instrument. So in that way, it was a good learning opportunity. And actually, now that I'm thinking about this at the moment, it was also how I started to get real experience, I think, reading a treble clef in a brass setting, which was something that I was definitely not exposed to. And so, because at that time with G bugle arranging, everyone was reading treble clef, including the contra bugles. So,
which when I first heard that, it blew my mind. Not necessarily in the best way. I thought, how does that even work?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, at that age, you just do what the instructor says. Hey, this is how this works, and you just absorb it, and you kind of, there's ups and downs to how we learned how to play those instruments. But I guess everyone has a different path. So that's the path that I took.
So in the homework that I did, I read 3 names of groups that people will recognize to various different degrees, and one of them is the Freelancers, and I was a big fan when I first discovered drum corps. It was one of the groups that was playing accessible stuff, and it was fun to listen to. And I remember getting that first set of DCI Finals cassette tapes and hearing the Freelancers and saying, oh, that's cool. The other group was the Crossmen, and that has a little bit to do with how I even got connected with you in the first place. And there was this little group called Blast.
Yeah, it's interesting how those all weave together as well. So yeah, Freelancers for me, to that point, also probably Crossman. My involvement with those two groups was really because of the accessibility of those groups. I'm from a fairly isolated town in California, the Central Valley of California. And so in order to be involved with the drum corps, at least, 2 to 4 hours away to find the nearest drum corps. And at the time that I was interested in marching, Freelancers from Sacramento, California, would send a bus up it would start down in Southern California in Northridge at CSU Northridge, and would just drive and stop along the way at all the valley towns and pick people up who wanted to be in the drum corps. I was very fortunate that my parents were okay and trusting that I was going to be good to hop onto a bus and head up to a drum corps rehearsal. So yeah, that it was just for me accessibility. I could get to it, and it turned out, obviously I loved being there. The people that I got to work with and the friends that I met. I mean, spent 3 years there. That corps unfortunately folded kind of in the middle of my marching career, and also in the middle of a season. So it was very difficult to find a place to march. And so me and some of my friends, we're just looking around, and this is early days of the internet. So just even getting information about what might be available was a little tricky, but we reached out to some of our favorite drum corps at the time, just to see who might have spots open. And, a lot of the people that we called, they just didn't have spots that late in the season. But we reached out to Crossman. They had spots at this time and were just more than eager to bring us out and give us a spot to march. So we were able to wait until the end of the school year and just fly out for move-ins. And I'll tell you, like, for me, that was like probably one of my first trips, if not first trip to the East Coast, and just to walk into the high school, which I don't remember where it was, but I'm certain it was in Delaware somewhere, because at the time the Corps was kind of operating out of that home base. I just remember being welcomed just with open arms, and the people were so entirely friendly, and we felt at home there. So it was a very small Corps to start with, but it grew throughout the year. We would just pick up members along the way. I mean, literally sometimes on the road, someone would just join the Corps. So it was a small and tight-knit Corps, and I just loved what was happening there. And again, stayed there for 3 years, and that Corps evolved through time as well. But it was my time at that drum corps program that really made connections to the Blast opportunity, which you mentioned before. The folks involved with Crossman at that time, many of them were from the Star of Indiana organization, which, we were clear, as a drum corps kid, that was like my favorite drum corps back then. Yeah. And so they were not around by the time I marched at Crossman, but we were aware that their staff was there. So that was a big factor for us, wanting to go out and be on the East Coast.
There are people who did not realize that Blast wasn't just All Star of Indiana, just rebranded and repurposed. And I was one of them. I did not realize.
Yeah. And I will say, probably not too many people know about this, but there were quite a few Crossmen in the Blast organization, probably because of, I would say largely because of the involvement with that former Star of Indiana staff with that drum corps. Yeah, I remember, taking like cast photos at different times through our career with Blast, and all the Crossmen, let's get together and take a group photo. And there were quite a few of us. So yeah, definitely.
I'm trying to decide, was this a weird question to ask? Did they give you a little Tony Award and a little Emmy Award to put on your mantle, or do you just have to convince people that you had it?
Yeah, no, we didn't all get our own personal Tonys and Emmys. It's, that obviously props to, I was a performer in that organization, but I think with any musical ensemble, or ensemble in general, it really is always a team effort. And so those awards were, well earned by our wonderful staff that worked for us, and designers, and of course the cast members themselves. It was a lot of pieces moving to make those things happen. So I'm just happy to have been in the right place at the right time and able to list those on a bio at some point. Little claim to fame here.
And yet you got to have the feats on the stage. Otherwise, it's just an idea.
It's just true. It's true.
So your path from music student to band director runs through an undergraduate minor in art and a major in communications. And we talked a little bit before we started recording about how I kind of identify a little bit with it, at the very least, not starting out as a music education major person and ending up getting in that direction. Talk about that little process. And I've kind of preempted my usual last introduction question, which is, what's your current band role? This is it.
So, I mean, it is an odd path. And to be honest, it's probably a source of some imposter syndrome, I will say, through my life. But the reason that I ended up in communications in my undergrad was at the time a huge interest in video production. This is kind of right at the era where we were moving from tape to digital. My parents were professional photographers and educators. And so, I really rebelled by being interested in video instead of photo. At the time seemed massively different to me, but obviously not so much. But so I studied video production in college, and the art minor was just a good fit with that. I did do music, but it was very challenging to be fully engaged in as a music major or even in ensembles, and also be involved with drum corps at that time. I think at that time, it's probably safe to say that those two worlds were not always in sync with each other. And so if I wanted to march in the summer and be involved with marching band and teach rehearsals in the evenings with my former high school group, it became very difficult to be in ensembles and to be focused on music studies. And so I kind of chose a path that wasn't the music education route at that time. And so I do look back and wonder, what if, but I'm not upset with how things have turned out. So, it all worked out in the end, but I didn't study music early on. Really, just to draw a quick through line, my path to my position here at the college was really through the marching arts. And so I stayed involved with drum corps through my college years. I did make a decision after I aged out to go back and study music. And so I did go back and actually right here, the institution I am now teaching at, took some music studies for about a year and worked with some great faculty out here at that time. But it wasn't very long after that I was offered an emergency position as a marching band director. So I was like on a 2/5 salary teaching a marching band at my alumni high school. And then very shortly after that was alerted to the blast opportunity. And so I had to make a decision. Do I want to keep performing for a little bit? Not really knowing what blast was. It wasn't a thing quite yet. And so that path led me to that performance opportunity. And I did stick with that for about 7 years. And while doing that, in the back of my mind, what's next is kind of what was always running on in my mind. So that led to an interest in starting hopefully starting some sort of marching program or reviving a marching program at the college. There hadn't been a marching band at the college since the 90s. I don't know if right away I had an interest in starting a drum corps there, but that was definitely brewing around in my mind. And so as I was on the road, as a performer, really was starting to think about how might we start a drum corps in our community or revive a marching band program. And so when I made the decision to leave the show and move on to that next step, I was connected to the community college through a colleague, a high school band director, a well-respected band director who actually just recently passed, Mark McGuire. And he happened to be an adjunct faculty at the community college here, Bakersfield College. His drumline coach at the time, who was also a Blast cast member, got linked into the show as well, was here working on like an entertainment drumline. The band director reached out to me and said, hey, I'm going to step away from this position. There might be an opportunity there if you're interested in developing the marching program. He made some connections. And then that led to an adjunct position here at the college, officially teaching the concert band because that's where the need was. But then in the other room, on the other side of the hall at the, when the concert band was meeting, my drumline colleague was building an entertainment drumline. So we kind of wrapped those two things together. And, so that's kind of how I ended up at the college. We spent a lot of time developing that program. I was a full-time teacher I'm leaving a lot out here, but I was a full-time teacher at that high school, teaching photo and video. So that was that. I did end up looping back to that, teaching career and technical education courses there, helping the marching band on the side, and stayed involved with just writing and teaching high school bands and things just for fun while I was part-time at the college, helping to develop this drumline program. So really what we did at the college was developed an indoor drumline program that first started in 2009. Once the indoor drumline program was up and running, that became a bit of a model for expanding into a drum corps program at some point. And around about that time, I took the opportunity to work with the Madison Scouts organization. There were some blast folks that were involved with the Scouts around 2010. And I happened to be really interested in what they were doing there, and got connected with Jeff Lee, who was working with the sound design. We didn't quite, I don't know that anyone was really referring to it as such at that time, but he got involved with sound design there with the corps, and then pulled me in as a sound technician because I had a kind of a growing interest in audio. But for me, really, at that point, the ulterior motive was to learn about how a drum corps operated, and that a role as a sound engineer was actually really great because it was a technical role that offered a lot of time in the day to interface with the corps administration, with instructional staff, the students, and learn a lot about how the organization operated. And I learned a ton about that organization and the activity in general. Made a lot of contacts in the drum corps activity. I'll mention David Edelman as a real important, I think, turning point for me, being able to meet him as a contest coordinator in Drum Corps International, but then later really a mentor who guided us through the development of our program out here in Bakersfield. I eventually was offered a full-time position at the college to further develop the marching arts offerings here. And then I think at that point was right around the same time that we were able to start the drum corps. So things have evolved since then, but I'll kind of pause there and let you interject, because I feel like I'm just talking about myself at this point.
This is why we do this, because people may well be interested in this sort of thing. So you made a drum corps, which is, of course, not remotely as straightforward as that sentence makes it sound.
Yeah. So in my mind, the way things would play out was we would be able to explain what a marching band was. There was a marching band previously, so we kind of figured, well, we'll revive a marching band program, and that by default will kind of give us the infrastructure we need to then turn around in the summers and have a drum corps operation. What we found out, though, interestingly, for really economic reasons, this is like right after the big crash in 2008, and we're trying to build this program. Not only was there not a whole lot of money for really anything that was non-essential at that time, but even just the perception of money going into something that wasn't essential didn't look really great. So it was very challenging to convince administration that a marching band was a thing to be starting in, 2009.
And my question in any time, but I could imagine even in that moment, would be who decides what's essential? But anyway.
Right. Good point, right? So it was a little frustrating to hear that, and we were fully willing to do our own fundraising, which is kind of how the program has really mostly been structured until I would say recent years. So yeah, the path of marching band to drum corps was not going to be how it happened. And so we just decided, well, if we're making our own way anyway, let's just start with the drum corps, and maybe that'll turn into a marching band at some point. So yeah, it definitely started that way. And of course, as you kind of hinted at before, it wasn't just, turnkey operation and there we had a drum corps. There was a lot to learn along the way. I think there's what's the saying, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. That's kind of the same with our programs. We were not in a rush to build the programs, and we were using them like we kind of scaffolded our building of the program. The drum line was the test kitchen, and then we were able to expand from what we learned structurally from starting the drum line, and then of course lots of guidance once we got to the point where we were communicating with Drum Corps International. There was a lot of guidance on their end and mentorship on their end to make sure that we were taking our time and and really focusing on our plan and making sure that it was something that would not only be out there when we started it, but would be around for a while. And so from the beginning of the development of the program, the idea was to build a program that would outlast anyone who was involved at the beginning. That we were not building it to win DCI. We were building it to create an opportunity for students in this community that would be around for years to come. So hopefully we're working on that.
So your first season of Golden Empire, not merely with it, was 2014. And by 2018, you had become an open class finalist. Was there a 5-year plan in your mind, or did it work out that way?
It was exactly that. It was a 5-year plan, which was largely, again, through guidance really from other corps and the administration at Drum Corps National, encouraging us to have that kind of structure. There's quite a bit, people may or may not know how much is in place organizationally with Drum Corps National to provide resources for groups they're interested in being, participating in that activity, to make sure that they're creating sound businesses. And because really that's what you're building at that stage is a business, and they want that business to be successful and be around to serve students. And
because enough corps have folded because of reasons that had nothing to do with whether they were successful on the field.
Exactly. Those two things sometimes correlate, but they are not necessarily related. And so, so that the 5-year plan really was something that we were encouraged to do, but something we kind of maybe intuitively knew we needed to do. And in hindsight, that 5-year plan was very much tour oriented. So we were looking at what will we need to do to be able to expand the length of our tour each year, so that in 5 years we might be able to attend championships in Indiana. And so we, for the most part, stayed on track with that plan, and it worked out. But what we did learn through that process was that tour model is not necessarily for every organization. I've learned that there are a lot of different ways to run organizations, and while touring and putting all the resources that are required, human resources, fiscal resources into developing a program that can get out there is certainly important. And we learned a lot and had a great time and provided some great opportunities for those students. But it was not maybe the most sustainable thing for us to do on different layers. And so we, around 2019, after that 2019 season, we're looking at, let's think about the next 5 years. What does that look like? And should we be trying to get to Indy every year? Then, as you may know, we happen to have a pandemic in there.
I'm sure that wasn't part of the 5-year plan number 2. No.
No, not our plan.
Now, there was something that you mentioned earlier that I had done a little bit of homework and taken note of, which was the sound engineer part of your drum corps experience. And I was originally going to ask about it just kind of in the general. To some people, the addition of the audio technology side of things is controversial, but it's undeniably a part of the drum corps activity now. And because DCI has its influences, it's all part of the top level high school band programs now, and even some non-competitive ones, not to mention a number of college bands. And I think it's safe to say, I apologize for the pun in advance, but that put you at the vanguard of a rather large next step in the evolution of the marching activity. I'm not sure I'm overstating that, but I think the reason why I'm interested in that now is that you established a drum corps kind of with a college or with an academic institution providing an environment, physical and resource-wise, to do it. But you may have dodged the bullet of having to bring them along from what used to be drum corps, G bugles and no amplification, to where it is now. Is that a fair statement, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to that. I think the idea, to drill into the piece of like developing the program at a college campus, there were a lot of reasons for that. One was just practical. I knew that if I were going to be involved with it, I probably wouldn't have the time or resources to just do that on the side. And now knowing what I know, I certainly couldn't have done that. I mean, like it's a 24/7 pursuit. And so part of it was, is there a way for me to be a part of the drum corps activity and make that part of my day job, so to speak? The college, I think not having a marching band program and having just, having the right people in the right place at the right time just seemed like the best place to do it. And really, I will say one of the reasons I love to work here is we are a community college in every sense of that word, and we have a great university here in town, Cal State Bakersfield, which we have some great relationships with and collaborations with. In fact, our orchestra is a joint orchestra with the university, but the community college is really embedded in this community on so many levels. And it is kind of an odd thing to have a drum corps at, I suppose. I remember going to the first music educators conference here for California community colleges and speaking to folks, and they're like, marching arts, what even really is that? It seems odd, but so we are one of very few California community colleges that have marching related programs. There's a few of us, but it was really the connections to the community, I think, that were incredibly important. And the idea here was, I got to march because, I was fortunate enough to have parents that were supportive and had the resources to allow me to travel out of town to do that. But what I learned, and I guess what opportunities opened up for me by being able to travel out of town, which in our particular part of the state is quite difficult to do. It's pretty isolated to get out of town.
Harder than out here on the East Coast.
Yeah, right. You go 2 hours away, you've crossed a state or two. So
at least, yeah.
but yeah, it's really there's a gravitational pull to the Central Valley, and it's very hard to leave that orbit sometimes. And what I learned about myself, about other people, about how the world works by being able to travel away, and other people get this through traveling away to school, or for me it happened to be drum corps. That was so important, and I'm like, I just realized that not every kid here in our community will have that opportunity. And if we build a program here, then we can help those students get out on tour and see other places and see how other people do things in different places of the world. And so that was kind of the idea. And that's so in line with what I think, the point of this college is to give students a good starting place to then go wherever they want to. Hopefully that's what our drum corps has been able to do.
And there are statistics that talk about what percentage of the people born in this country never travel further away from their place of birth than 50 miles.
Yeah. So I mean, not to get, too deep, but I mean, so much of our experience is empathy. And I think you develop that by, making connections with other people and getting out of your own bubble. And the drum corps and our drumline program and really all of our performing arts ensembles here are vehicles for that. And so I think that's really what we're doing. Are we hopefully teaching great musicians and actors and all of that in our department? Hopefully so. But really, we're hopefully creating some empathetic humans that are great citizens that will go out into the world and do good things no matter what they are. And so that's kind of the idea behind what we're doing.
It is not often that I regret having questions to ask at the end, because we could wrap it up right there. There's the point. But I will nonetheless finish up with some of these slightly less strictly resume-oriented band questions. And throughout this, we can assume that band can also mean drum corps, although it doesn't have to. First question that I always ask is, what's one of your favorite pieces of band music that you've played? Either outdoors or indoors? Either playing or conducting, does not matter.
If I think about my marching arts experience, a song that makes my blood boil is probably Medea's Dance of Vengeance, which of course was
in a good way. Okay, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Just the velocity. I mean, memories of watching, not being a part of, but watching the Star of Indiana in 1993. And gosh, I can remember the first time at that time I was still in freelancers on the West Coast, and the first show where Star was at a show that we were at, we had put our horns away, or probably actually put them down in a retreat block somewhere. That's a whole different drum corps story. But we were walking back into the stadium, and I remember having a view through a tunnel kind of in the center of the stadium. You couldn't really hear very well, but the mellophones were staged such that they were kind of right there and you could see through. And this is there's a whole section there where they're playing in like minor seconds and it's dissonant, and it's just not something you would have heard on a drum corps field. And it was just jaw dropping. think at that time the activity was really hating on them, just not a fan of what was happening. And I think even then was like just fascinated by it. And of course, in hindsight, I think that goes down as like a pivot point for the activity, possibly. So, and then I had the complete honor of then getting to perform that in the Blast show.
Yeah.
And I will say that's probably, that's not the same as being on that 1993 field with that full drum corps, but it's its own thing that has its,
a little taste of it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And boy, what wasn't Starr making a career out of showing drum corps in the marching world what could be done on the field, and the marching world was having none of it.
Yeah. Yes.
The last couple of questions I usually do start with, is there a band or a group that you'd love to perform with that you haven't, because either you're not the right age now, or you're not in the right place, or you don't live in the right period of history?
Yeah, I don't think I would say a specific band, but what I will say that I've thought about a lot recently is an area of music that I didn't really get into, but I'm fascinated with. I'll just say pop music in a broad sense. Like I was never like in a rock band or a pop band, anything like that. I'm going to talk about my brother a little bit. I have a younger brother who was, did marching band in high school or whatever, but he was like in garage bands and that kind of thing. He's now a history teacher, but he has found a way to balance a rich home life with a couple of kids and a great wife and all of that in his teaching career, with also being in one of our community's more well-known bands that has actually a tie to this college from its origins. But he plays percussion with that group, and I just love that he's doing that. So we geek out all the time on like, hey, what's your setup for this thing? They just did a Bob Marley tribute the other day, and he was we're talking about gear. I'm really interested in audio, so had sound check go, this, that, and the other. And I really feel like I have a fascination with that world, but have really only come to it through the weird pathway of audio as it relates to the marching arts, and then back into commercial music. So it's been a weird path. So that's my band that I've never been in, is some sort of garage band.
And my last usual question is, have you got a favorite band story you want to tell? There was a hint of one, but I don't know whether that was it.
Broadly speaking, this is something I have thought about, and that is our human nature to remember the things that actually didn't go well, as opposed to the things that did go well. So we're all hopefully a part of some really great moments in the band programs that we're a part of, and have some amazing experiences there. But what I have found through the adversity of touring and all these other things, the things that I remember are the things that didn't go so well, and there are many of those. But one that popped into my head was one of our indoor drumlines trips to WGI World Championships. This is like maybe our second year as a organization, or maybe our second year traveling to championships. And we had done all the planning that we needed to do. We had made it to the airport. For us, that's a 2-hour drive down to Los Angeles. And, we're in the airport. Just so happened to be the day that American Airlines ticketing system or their internal system basically shut down nationwide, or probably globally. So literally every flight was grounded that they had, and of course we were flying American that day. So it's a long story that probably many of us can relate to if we've dealt with air travel experiences before, but it's a little different when you're at one or two people headed across the country. But when you have another 40, 50 people with you and you're the person in charge, it becomes very challenging. I remember at one point being on 2 phones at the same time, a travel agent over here on one side and my dean of instruction on the other. We had to break the group with the college permission up into multiple flights to get them to the next place, which was not our plan, and split our staff up and all this. And I will say, American Airlines was great. They I think we connected in DFW or something, and they had a whole room for us with cots. We slept overnight. It was great. Food vouchers, the whole thing, and ended up making it to our hotel in Dayton the next day eventually. And a little bit later than we hoped, but we didn't. I don't even think we lost a rehearsal block, but it became a huge trial, let's just say. And we made it out on the other end and had a successful trip, and everyone was safe and had a good time. And so I think that one sticks out in my head. But I think more broadly, just these moments that don't go so well, but that end up being the memory makers that we get to take with us. And hopefully they make us more resilient people along the way too.
Well, I really appreciate having you on for this conversation today. Our mutual friend Ryan Atherton connected me with you, only really just saying you were a friend of his from his Crossman days. And I'm glad that I did my homework, because I discovered through my research and through this conversation that you are a great many things, not least of which was a window into not just the beginnings of the sound engineering era of the marching activity, but you really bridged, I don't want to say a divide exactly, but at the very least you had a foot on either side of a drum corps moment, a pivot moment that has turned an activity that a lot of people know of as one thing into an activity that looks like a different thing. And that's a struggle, but that's okay. Struggle is fine.
Agreed.
So I feel like it was useful to have this conversation and have a good time on top of that, and to note a couple of topics of conversation that it would be fun to come back to, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely likewise. Just it was great to have an opportunity to reflect on some of these things. My current position doesn't really have me directly involved with our marching groups as much as I have been, and so it's been fun to kind of reminisce about those things. But I will say, like, that audio topic down the road might be something interesting. I think you mentioned this pivot point in the marching arts activity. It really feels that we've moved from the very specific disciplines of these, like, winter guard, drumline, marching band, to what is really more like a musical production. And so the techniques and equipment and all these things that have been around for years in the musical theater world, doing effectively the same thing that we are now trying to do in the marching arts worlds, are really dovetailing. And I think it's exciting to see on all kinds of levels. As an educator, working with, I teach a live sound class here, and these are students who are learning a trade that hopefully they can go out and make a career with. Had I known at that age that, you mean I could be at a mixing console in front of a Broadway show and actually be helping with that process, that would have blown my mind at that age. I just didn't realize that. And so what I think is really great about our marching arts activity doing that, just like marching arts is great, is exposing students to different musical selections that they might never have encountered otherwise. I think it's exposing them to a technology that could be a possible career for them. Hopefully we're now not only educating musicians and dancers and all that, but we're also educating audio engineers and all the other technical staff that are involved with music in some kind of way. So it's an exciting time.
Are there places online where people can find and follow the various things, and there are a bunch of them, that you're up to?
For me individually, probably my college website is the best place to go, or at bakersfieldcollege.edu. And then we have social media for our marching ensembles. So primarily that'll be our drumline, so BC Drumline on Instagram, and GE Drum Corps on Instagram. Both of those ensembles are literally classes at the college and have their own staff and design team and student cohort and all that. And so their activities are out there for people to check out. We'd love to see people at shows.
Educator, drum corps director, sound engineer, Tim Heasley, thanks for talking with me today, and may good fortune follow both you and Bakersfield College and the Golden Empire.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, on the other side of this brief break, I've got a story of band world admiration from a non-band world source. Whatever can he mean? Do stay with me and see. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is a quick story, very quick indeed, but I saw it posted somewhere online some time ago, and I thought this might be the moment to tell it here. There's this thing called the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize. It's the nation's highest award for influence, impact, and achievement in the field of popular song. It was established in 2007 to recognize and honor the artists whose creative works, both printed and recorded, are collected, preserved, made accessible, and valued by the Library of Congress. It's awarded annually to acknowledge the preeminent place of popular song in modern society and its vital role in expressing and deepening the personal and shared values of our time. Past recipients include Joni Mitchell, Lionel Richie, Garth Brooks, Emilio and Gloria Estefan. So hey, that halftime show meant something, didn't it? Tony Bennett, Smokey Robinson, Willie Nelson, Billy Joel, Carole King, Burt Bacharach, Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, and Paul Simon. And while we breathlessly await the naming of this year's honoree, which will happen next month, we can take note that in 2024, the recipients were Elton John and Bernie Taupin, two names that need no introduction or explanation. And when Elton John was asked if he had a favorite composer, he replied, John Philip Sousa. I want to know more about just where that answer came from, but I will take it very happily. So, one last pause to catch our breath, and then we'll wrap things up for this week. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, another very brief note about the 35% off sale that the TeePublic print-on-demand merchandise website is running. TeePublic hosts the BandWagon t-shirt, hat, magnet, wall art, and hoodie stash. There are other sorts of goodies with BandWagon sayings and logos all over them as well, so do go browse and see what they've got if you like. Now through February 23rd, so all this week, everything is as much as 35% off. Not required, dear listener, but it's available. And this is why I didn't go into sales for a living. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by Elton John's favorite composer, John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast, unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this week's news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Tim Heasley, can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton, and I hope to have you aboard again next week for our 50th episode. Ooh, I can't wait.